Hi, I'm David Hearn with AuthorsReading.com, and I'm excited to welcome Brendan Walsh, the author of The Century Scribe, published by Black Rose Writing. It is a masterpiece of intricate world building, displaying depth and complexity in this imagined world. It is a brilliant, diverse, thought-provoking, masterfully told tale, an epic fantasy at its finest. Walsh's book is staggering in scope, but he handles it masterfully. He introduces two worlds that are interconnected by a conduit of matter that the inhabitants call the Phoenician Sea. It is a mysterious mist or gas that has the ability to transport beings from one dimension to another. Brendan?
To start off with, I'd like to know why, what was the purpose of writing this book?
For context, this is my fourth novel. I wrote I wrote three when I was in college, and this one was my first foray basically into high fantasy. And this one did feel a lot different to me because it was the first time I think I really tried to incorporate a lot of my own sort of relationships into it. A lot of the characters are sort of an amalgamation of a number of people I've known, and I sort of put myself in each of them in a sort of unique way. And a lot of the story was sort of a long time in the making. Additionally, sort of for context, this book was a lot longer at first. It was about 160,000 words, though my publisher didn't particularly like that length, so it's now going to be cut into two books. And so
this book is going to be cut into two books?
Correct, yeah. So this one, originally the ending of this book was the middle of the book. So that was a little bit of a challenge, but I think I managed to do with it the best I could and sort of adapt. And so in addition to that, the sort of months and years that it took sort of getting me to craft this and getting inspiration from a lot of different places. Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn is one of them, because originally I wasn't as big of a high fantasy guy. I was more of a Neil Gaiman, Jim Butcher kind of guy. And so that's basically my answer. Did I answer your question, basically?
Well, yeah, there's quite a few social issues that I feel like you have brought into this particular book, even though it's in another entire world than what we actually live in. But nonetheless, I feel like you actually are making statements in it about various social issues that we have right here, right now, that we're facing. And by the way, one other thing I wanted to ask you: how are things out there in California? Are you in this area where the fires are going, or are you?
A little bit. So
to see what they're coming.
Yeah, I'm like, so yeah, the air quality is really bad in Arcadia, which is about a 20-minute drive from here. It's been really bad the last few days, but lately it's been a little bit better. Last I heard, the fires were about 6% contained, which is better than 0% a few days ago.
Yeah.
So, but yes, in regards to your point, I don't want to go too deep into spoiler territory, or maybe I do. I don't know. But one of the things that intrigued me in sort of the world building and some of the reveals in this book is, I think something a reader will notice that's a bit strange is the theory of evolution comes up fairly often. I think the first time it's mentioned is chapter 2. Sort of unique for a fantasy novel in a fantasy setting, especially since the setting it comes up is not really sort of 19th century society. It feels a bit more ancient than that, maybe by a couple centuries at least. And so one of the things I thought was interesting is I've sort of done a good amount of research into this, and a lot of people, like when the theory of evolution was first, or Origin of Species was first written, like it was really like world shaking. And something that I think a lot of people don't realize is how exactly these ideas were used to as evidence of the superiority of the white race, or as how it was used for like, or used to justify eugenics and genocide and a lot of really horrible things. And there's a that's really important in regards to the relationship between humans and avos in this book. A lot of that I hint at sort of in the chapters leading up to the end, but there are some hints sprinkled in there that I hope the inquisitive reader will notice before the more of the big reveal happens.
Well, I think they will. Certainly, I read a part of your book. I wasn't the actual reviewer for authorsreading.com, but I read a lot of it, and I felt like I could feel it right off when I started reading it, that there was a lot of parallels between what you, in your world that you had created, and our actual world that we all live in right now. The race relationships, the sexual orientation, just all these things you brought out in a brilliant way in your book, I thought. And one of the things I really like too, was your dragon. So why did you put that dragon in there?
That is a good question. The easy answer is I like dragons. The first time I wrote one was in a book I wrote called Immortale. That's about a dragon. Well, it's not about, but it features a dragon that was a confidant of King Arthur in the past. And because of the absence of magic in the world, suddenly it became like a normal lizard until magic came back. And so, oh, that's a fun aspect of that story. But to answer your question, I wanted, and I don't want to necessarily say too much because this is going into the next book a little bit to really describe why I did that. But I really like the idea of this giant, just sort of solitary creature that exists in this world and is, for better or worse, a fan of the modern man. Like this dragon is a big fan of reading, big fan of learning about culture, learning about like current events. And I wanted to play with the idea of a being that was so distant from society or so just uninvolved, yet so fond of it at the same time. And just the first thought that came to me is, oh, I'll make him a dragon. Although I could have made him sort of my own creation, a sort of unique animal or whatever, but for some reason I felt compelled to do that. And the relationship between the dragon and Cypher Lane, I think, is really interesting because he's like so clinically fond of reading like fiction, nonfiction. She works for one of the best publishers in her country, and the way they sort of go back and forth in dialogue and sort of learn about each other, I think is really cool.
And of course, the part where he's saving her life.
And yes, and that too.
Yeah, I thought that was a very interesting piece that you put in there. What else are you working on right now?
I am working on what is technically book 3 now of the series.
Which again would have the same characters in it that
correct, yes,
introduced to in this particular book.
Yeah, that one I'm about 30,000 words into. It's not a direct sequel. It takes place a few years afterwards. Unlike book 2, which is literally takes place right where this one left off. And another one is I'm also working on a fantasy whodunit. It's a murder mystery in a fantasy setting, which interestingly enough, I felt compelled to put it in this same universe, except it takes place about 200 years before the events of this book. So it takes place in the country of Skalbard, 200 years before the very first prime minister overthrew the monarchy. And it's sort of magic is everywhere. There's a lot of quirky characters, takes place at an isolated inn, sort of like in an Agatha Christie tradition. And that one I'm having a lot of fun with so far.
And this Phoenician, is that pronounced right? Phoenician Sea?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So that follows through into the next book also too.
Correct. Yeah, the mystery of the two worlds, the Phoenician Sea, the real forgotten history of this of the first Prime Minister of Svalbard is all comes to light very quickly in this next one.
So how long have you been writing now?
My first novel did take me a while. I began writing it as a college freshman in December of 2013. Although I did not want to write and do schoolwork at the same time, so I left that at home when I went
Right.
back to college. But then my next year, I took it a lot more seriously. My first novel was called The Raven Gang. It's sort of a sci-fi-ish mystery thriller, like young adult mystery thriller, and that one took me about 2 years to finish, between increasing schoolwork and being a former science major that I was, having to balance all of that was a bit difficult, but eventually I completely just committed myself to writing and became an English major, and that's where it became a lot more easy to write consistently. So I guess almost 7 years I've been a writer.
So are you writing to make yourself happy, or do you feel like you're writing to please your audience out there? I mean, are you writing things that you really, really want to write, or are you a person who hoping that what you write is what the public actually is demanding right now?
Maybe more, I think more of what I want to write. Because initially as a writer and when I was doing short stories as well, I felt so loath to send them out to places, even to like little like science fiction publications, because even though it wasn't my most, I wouldn't consider that my most personal work. It was personal just by the merits of me being a new writer and being so vulnerable to feedback at the time that I was. So but to further answer your question, I wasn't, when I was writing this book, I didn't really think of that too much. I just wanted to really write what I felt like I really wanted to. And I did have the hope and knowledge that a lot of people would find it and would really like connect with some of the characters and sort of the drama that goes on. And although I think for my first novels, I didn't really have much of a readership. I did some sales, I had some reviews, but not until this one have I been really like more actively updating to see if I have like a readership or a following.
Yeah.
So now that I see some reviews that I'm getting and people saying that, like, I have one reviewer kindly say, "Oh, how I wish this wasn't divided into two books. I wish it was just one." So I definitely would like to make those people more happy in the future. But when it comes to, I guess, the important social issues that I cover and uh, sort of the portrayal I have of these characters, where they sort of go through like these personal struggles with like alcohol or mental illness. I consider that very personal to myself. So I don't know if some people might be a bit turned off by that to some capacity, but I want to make sure that remains in there because it's of what it means to me.
And I think actually when a person, an author, when they add, when they're writing about the social issues hidden inside of their whatever they're writing about, I like it. I think it's something that we should be doing. I think authors should be putting that type of effort into their book that they're trying to show through these other worlds, through these through various methods, social issues and solutions to it in these other worlds. I mean,
Yeah, I completely agree. Something that I've heard people say that I completely disagree with is, like, when people want to turn to high fantasy, people think one should rely on too much on like established tropes with like worlds. And a lot of that comes from Tolkien. I mean, he's great. He's an amazing amazing writer. Lord of the Rings is fantastic, but like a lot of the stories that follow are, I fear sometimes people feel a bit too limited to what they want to do, because sometimes branching out could be a bit too daring, maybe. Um, I've been I've been told in the past that I shouldn't, like, if I'm writing a fantasy world, I shouldn't like make it too like real or like resemble, like make it too like much like modern day in regards to like social issues. Um, but I said no, I didn't want that, because the truth is that this is, if I'm making my own world, I can really do whatever I want, and I could make it as sort of personal as, or as real as I want it to be with these issues. And I'm glad I have.
Yeah, well, I think you've done a great job in this particular book, to tell you the truth. Um, um, who do you read? What's your favorite authors right now, or don't you do too much of that?
Um, I read too much. My I would say my favorite author is Ray Bradbury. I tend to, a lot of my favorite books are actually more sci-fi than fantasy, although I do love them both fairly equally. So Ray Bradbury would be at the top. Martian Chronicles is probably my favorite book. I love Neil Gaiman. He was my first uh, influence in fantasy with Good Omens and Neverwhere. And Brandon Sanderson for me was he introduced me to high fantasy that I really loved. Like in high school, I'd read Lord of the Rings, like everyone, in The Hobbit, and I thought that was really cool, but I didn't really latch on to that as much as most people my age. And it wasn't until him that I was really shown how creative one could be, and how innovative one could be with characters and like these magical systems that are arguably more sci-fi than fantasy. And but uniquely, I think Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, when I read that in high school, was uniquely influential to me.
Which
Uh,
one?
Frankenstein.
Frankenstein.
Uh, so in a way, that those have been maybe some of my greatest influences.
Yeah, I was surprised. I read Frankenstein too, and or actually, I must admit, I listened to the audiobook, and I was surprised of the politics that was actually in that book that you didn't really know about if you just saw the movie.
Oh yeah.
It was much different, the actual book and what she wrote back at that particular time. Um, so do you have a lot of support for what you're doing right now, as far as family and friends and everything?
Absolutely, yes.
That's good.
I've my brother, who actually just moved to Philadelphia now, yesterday, has been a very close friend of mine as well. Ever since I started writing my first book, he has been always very supportive and very willing to read what I write, regardless of quality. And my good friend from college, who I'm actually currently living with, his name is Scott. He's always been really supportive of me, and even with my first book, he was very eager and willing to read it, even though we weren't even friends at the time. And
Yeah.
just, I don't know, without just the sort of little things like that, I can't help but wonder if things would have turned out a little bit differently for me. So I'm very thankful for the both of them, definitely.
So I know you. I know you're very much into your book reviews. So you're reading a lot of them. Have you had any bad ones? And if you have, I mean, were they accurate, or were they? Do you feel like sometimes people just write crazy things that are really meaningless but hurt you or hurt us as authors?
So far for the Century Scribe, the worst I've had is I've had a 3-star review, and that was on Goodreads and Amazon. Although it didn't bother me too much, because the person who reviewed it, she only wrote positive things. Like, she just wrote everything she liked about it, and she's actually said some very nice things. So maybe she's just a tough grader, or maybe
Yeah.
she just omitted the things that she didn't like about it. But I was good with it. the first bad review I had, or the first one-star review, was for my fantasy novel Immortale that came out a couple years ago. One of the early like advanced readers of my publisher gave it 1 stars, and what they wrote was, "Oh, this was confusing. I couldn't make it past the first 30 pages," and that didn't really bother me a whole lot because they didn't really read enough to be able to know why they really didn't like it. It was confusing to them, which I don't know. To me, I thought it was a bit amusing because I don't think it's the most complicated book, so I sort of just shrugged it off. But inevitably, like I have a few promos happening. I did a Goodreads giveaway. I have a free promo next week, and I have a BookBub ad that's happening, I think, in a couple days. So I'm prepared definitely for like worse reviews than I've received. And to me, the way I intend to deal with them is like I think I've always been pretty good with receiving criticism. Like if somebody thinks I did a character poorly, I will own that. I would accept that. However, if somebody were to give me, I guess, a mean review, and the reason why was because they they maybe disagreed with some things in there, like in uh, how I deal with the social issues or how I deal with some characters. If that were the case, that wouldn't bother me because then it's like I feel like I'm doing my job.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it's interesting too that some of these stupid reviews that you see out there on Amazon have nothing to do with the writing itself. It has to do with the book wasn't sent to me on time. The book, the pages were not printed well. This type of thing, which I really upsets me because Amazon is so difficult to deal with reviews. As far as if, for example, your brother wrote a review about you and he was truthful about it, they'd probably remove his review. Or if somebody said, "Gee, I actually know this writer. He's just great. He went to school with me, and I think he's just wonderful." Well, there again, that review would probably be gone. But they'll leave in a review that says, "Well, when I got the book, the pages were all crumbled up, and I'm giving him a 1 for that." I think it's crazy. I think it should be your reviews should be about what you did and not something of that nature. So, what's on the where do you hope to go? Are you trying to be a full-time author, or is it?
Yeah, that is my goal. Um, as I work to promote this one, I'm working on 2 other books as well. Right now, I'm a master's student at the California State University Northridge. Uh, right now my intent is to continue writing and continue to be a good student in this program, and afterwards I I hope to be a professor, probably a creative writing professor. I have a couple people I went to high school with who did a similar track, and they have only good things to say about their experience so far. And I think I would really enjoy it. But if I can be a full-time writer, then I would happily sacrifice my academic aspirations for that.
So really, anything you'd really love to say to your audience? We're going to have to cut this short in a few minutes. So if there's anything you want to say, please do it right now.
Sure. Well, to anyone who's watching, if you have an interest in the book so far from what you heard, or if you're read the book and watching this to see what I have to say about it, thank you very much. This book initially took me a while, but really got into the groove of it. It only took me a few months to finish it because I was so determined. This book and the second part were probably the most personal work I may ever actually write, with the exception of maybe an autobiography. Um, these characters are more real to me than any others I've ever written, and I have a lot of love for them because of that. I'd like to if you enjoy the book and if you want to review it, something that makes me feel good, something that I love to know is which characters you may have connected with the most, um, and that makes me feel like I did a really good job crafting them, whether it's dialogue or how I describe their thought processes or just the situations they end up in, maybe through no fault of their own. Those are my favorite things to read about. And yeah, and thank you so much. Thank you so much for your interest.
Well, I want to tell you that the person who did review your book, she thought it was just a great, great book. She thought you did a fabulous job. And she's a woman who actually taught literature. She has a PhD, and I think that's a great endorsement for what you've done. And I liked it too. The amount of the book that I read, I thought was very interesting too, and the way that you actually, like, again, focusing on the social issues, that you sort of snuck them in there into this new world. I liked it. I thought that was great, because something that I think that, as I said before, authors should use their writing as a platform to make statements. And it's good because when you do it that way, people will actually listen to these characters say whatever you want them to say, and they won't be turned off like they do if it was just you talking. So anyways, I thought your book was great. So I hope people go out there and buy it, and I hope you have a tremendously successful career as an author. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, David.